Sometimes life gives us second chances in unexpected ways. After a serious accident, Jane wakes up with no memory and no knowledge of who she really is. With the help of Rafael, a man who mysteriously enters her life, she begins to rebuild her future, unaware that her past is about to resurface. Amidst confusing feelings and new discoveries, both will have to face what fate has in store for them. A story of love, new beginnings, and overcoming challenges that is sure to touch your heart. If you believe in the power of new beginnings and the impact of the choices we make, subscribe to the channel and like the video. The accident happened on a rainy autumn morning. The sound of tires screeching on the wet road echoed before a crash that made everything around stop. There was no way to forget, no way to erase the image of the smashed car, the woman unconscious in the driver's seat. Rafael never imagined that his life would change so drastically in a single second. He was on his way home, driving with distracted thoughts when he saw the smoke. Immediately, he stopped his car and ran toward the wrecked vehicle. Fear squeezed his chest as he tried to open the car door. With great effort, he succeeded, and there she was, the woman with golden hair spread across the seat and an empty gaze. Her body was pale, motionless, but he could still feel the lightness of her breath. In a way, she saved him. Rafael wasn't a doctor, but he knew what had to be done. He called for emergency services, and while waiting, he kept his hand firmly in hers, as if it was the only thread connecting him to reality. When the ambulance arrived, she was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. What no one knew was that the woman Rafael had just saved would remember nothing, nothing at all. The next morning, she awoke in a hospital bed, her eyes teary and her head dizzy. When she tried to get up, pain seized her body, and that's when the nurse informed her, "You were in a serious accident. You're recovering. Don't worry, everything will be okay." But what she didn't know was that when she looked into the mirror later, the reflection didn't make sense. There was no memory, no past, no one waiting for her. What frightened her the most was that it wasn't just the loss of memory. She felt as though something deep inside her soul had been erased. Rafael visited the hospital the next afternoon, more out of a need to understand what was happening to her than anything else. When he entered the room and saw her, a chill ran down his spine. She looked lost, as if still trying to comprehend what had happened. Her eyes, though sad, shone when she saw him. Do I know you?" she asked, her voice soft as if trying to remember a lost name. Rafael hesitated, but, with a calm expression, answered, "I'm Rafael. I was the first to find you after the accident. You don't remember me?" She just shook her head, helpless. Then, he made a silent decision in that moment. He would not let her be alone. Rafael's visit became a routine. He'd come by every afternoon after work, sitting by her bedside, talking to her as though she were the person he had known for years, even though she couldn't remember him. It was a strange kind of intimacy, built not on shared memories but on silent understanding. She didn't ask too many questions about her past, and he didn't press her. They existed in the moment, one day at a time. She had no name, no identity. The doctors said it could be temporary, a side effect of trauma, but they couldn't guarantee when or if her memory would come back. So, they referred to her simply as Jane, a name they had assigned for convenience. As the days passed, Jane became more aware of her surroundings. She remembered simple things, the sound of birds outside her window, the smell of the antiseptic in the air, the warmth of the sunlight filtering through the blinds. But her past remained a dark void. There were no faces, no connections, only fragments of a life that no longer seemed hers. One afternoon, as Rafael sat beside her, Jane finally spoke up. "Do you think I'll ever remember who I am?" Her voice was soft, almost fragile, and it tugged at his heart in a way he couldn't explain. Rafael looked at her, his gaze steady and kind. "Maybe. But you don't have to remember to be important. Right now you're here. That's what matters." It was the truth. In the short time they had spent together, Rafael had come to care for her deeply, in a way that felt both natural and profound. The woman sitting in front of him was a stranger, yet her presence filled a space in his life he didn't know existed. Jane smiled softly, the kind of smile that reached her eyes, even though it didn't quite reach her heart yet. "Thank you, Rafael," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I think I'm starting to feel like I belong here." Rafael nodded, but deep down he felt the weight of something unspoken between them. A bond was forming, an invisible thread, and he didn't know where it would lead. He only knew that he couldn't walk away from it, not now, not when she needed him the most. As the days turned into weeks, Jane's physical recovery began to show. The bruises faded, the cuts healed, and she was able to stand on her own. But it was her heart and mind that still seemed fragile, untouched by the healing process. Memories remained elusive, like an unread book locked in a dusty attic. Rafael had taken it upon himself to show Jane small fragments of life. The cafe across the street where he grabbed his morning coffee, the park where he often took walks to clear his mind, and the little bookstore that he frequented for quiet afternoons. But despite his efforts, Jane remained an enigma. She was trying, but it was as if her past was locked away somewhere, unreachable. One evening, as they walked through the park, the sky painted in hues of orange and purple, Jane looked at him. There was something different in her eyes, something deeper than before. "Do you think it's possible to fall in love with someone you've never met before?" The question took Rafael by surprise. He hesitated, his heart suddenly racing. It was a simple question, but it stirred something inside him, something that had been growing quietly since the day they met. He had never dared to admit it, but the truth was undeniable now. He had fallen for her. "I don't know," he replied softly, his voice a little more vulnerable than he intended. "But I do know that sometimes when you least expect it, you find a connection with someone that you can't explain. And that's what's happening here. Maybe we don't need to understand it." Jane gave him a small, uncertain smile. It was the first time in weeks that her smile reached her eyes. "I think I feel it too," she whispered. It was the first spark, the first glimmer of something more than just friendship. The bond between them was no longer a fragile thread. It was something stronger, something that neither of them could ignore. And though Jane still didn't remember who she was, in that moment, Rafael realized that he wasn't just helping her find herself. He was helping himself find something he never expected: love. As they continued to walk through the park, the air between them felt charged, as if the universe was finally aligning to bring them together. The past was still a mystery, but the future felt like it held something worth fighting for. The weeks that followed were filled with small, tender moments between them. Rafael began noticing how her laughter, though soft and hesitant at first, was becoming more genuine. She still had no memory of her life before the accident, but with every passing day she seemed to grow into someone more familiar, someone who began to feel like she belonged in his world. It wasn't just Jane's progress that moved him, it was how their bond had developed. Something unspoken had been building between them, a quiet understanding, a shared space that felt like it could easily turn into something more. But Rafael couldn't shake the fear that Jane might not feel the same. He had been careful, cautious, making sure to never push her into something she wasn't ready for. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of his apartment, the night air cool and crisp, Jane turned to him with an expression that wasn't quite like anything he'd seen before. She seemed to be studying him, as though searching for something in his face. "Rafael," she began, her voice shaky, "I've been thinking a lot lately, about everything, about who I am, about what I've lost, and about you." Rafael's heart skipped a beat. She had never directly mentioned their growing connection in such a way before. He looked at her, unsure of how to respond. Was she trying to tell him something? His breath caught in his throat. "I don't know what I feel," she continued, her eyes searching his face for some kind of reassurance. "But I do know that, despite everything, being with you, it feels like I'm starting to find pieces of myself again. Like you're helping me fill in the blanks." Rafael swallowed hard, the weight of her words hitting him all at once. He couldn't hold back anymore. "Jane, He paused, feeling the tension between them. "I've fallen for you." Not because you've lost your memories or because you're broken, but because of who you are right here, right now. The words hung between them, heavy and fragile. Jane didn't respond immediately. Instead, she gazed at him with wide eyes, the silence stretching between them. She was processing, searching her own heart for something she hadn't yet understood. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I've fallen for you too." Rafael's heart soared as a sense of relief washed over him. She didn't remember her past, but in this moment, their future felt clear. A new chapter was unfolding, one that neither of them could have predicted, but both now felt destined for. But even as the connection between them deepened, Rafael couldn't help but wonder, was this love enough to survive the past that Jane had forgotten? And if her memories returned, would they change everything? The days after their confession felt like a dream, one that Rafael had been too afraid to believe in until now. Jane seemed different, lighter, as if the weight of her forgotten past had been temporarily lifted by the newfound connection between them. They spent more time together, going on walks, sharing meals, and talking about everything and nothing. With every laugh, every touch, their bond grew deeper, yet the shadows of Jane's lost memories still lingered. One evening, as Rafael and Jane sat in the living room of his apartment, the silence was heavy. Jane had been staring at a small photo frame on the table, a photo of a family, a woman and a man smiling happily with a young child. Rafael had never noticed it before. "Who are they?" Jane asked softly, her voice almost hesitant, as though she were afraid of the answer. Rafael looked at the photo, then back at Jane, his heart sinking. He knew the question was inevitable, but he didn't know how to answer it without opening old wounds. The photo was one of his own parents taken years ago, a reminder of a family he had lost. "They're my parents," he said quietly. "They passed away a long time ago." Jane's eyes lingered on the picture, and she nodded slowly, a soft frown tugging at her lips. "I don't remember anything about my family," she said, almost to herself. "It's like there's a hole inside me where they should be." Rafael's chest tightened. He wanted to say something comforting, but he didn't know how. He had seen her struggle with this emptiness, but now that she had acknowledged it, it felt like a chasm between them. He didn't know if he could fill that space for her. "I'm sorry," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I just wish I could remember. I feel so lost sometimes." Rafael moved closer to her, his hand reaching out to gently touch hers. "You're not lost," he said softly. "I'm here. And I'll be here every step of the way, helping you find yourself again." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face, as though she were trying to determine if his words were truly sincere. For a moment, there was a flicker of something deep in her gaze. Vulnerability, fear, hope. It was a reminder that no matter how much progress they had made, Jane's past was still an unresolved puzzle, and it was only a matter of time before the pieces would start falling into place. Suddenly Jane stood up, a mixture of frustration and confusion crossing her face. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered. "I can't keep pretending like everything is okay when I don't even know who I am. What if I'm not the person you think I am? What if I'm someone completely different?" Rafael stood quickly, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached for her, gently pulling her back toward him. "You are the person I think you are. I don't need you to be anyone else. Just be you, Jane. That's all I need." She didn't say anything more, but she let herself sink into his arms, her head resting against his chest. For a fleeting moment, the world outside faded, and all that mattered was the two of them, lost in a bond neither of them fully understood, but both willing to explore. But the question still lingered in Rafael's mind. What if Jane's past came back to her? Would she still be the same woman he had fallen in love with, or would the return of her memories change everything between them? The days after Jane's emotional outburst were different. She had retreated inward, her mind lost in the fog of her forgotten past. Rafael gave her space, but he could sense the growing tension in the air, as if something inside her was shifting, something that neither of them could control. Rafael had always known that Jane's memory would eventually return. It was inevitable. What he didn't expect was the way it would come back, like a floodgate opening unexpectedly, releasing everything all at once. It started one afternoon, Several weeks later, Jane had been out for a walk alone, trying to sort through her thoughts. When she returned, there was something different about her. Her eyes were wide and her face was pale, as though she had seen a ghost. "Rafael," she whispered, her voice shaky. I remember something." He stood up from the couch, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do you remember?" he asked, his voice trembling with a mix of hope and fear. "I was at the park," she began, her voice distant as she tried to piece together the fragments of her memory. "I was with someone, a man. He was holding my hand, and I felt safe. But then something happened. There was an argument, a fight, and I was pushed. And then," her voice trailed off, and she looked at him, her eyes filled with confusion. "I don't know what happened next, it's all a blur." Rafael took a cautious step toward her, his heart in his throat. He wasn't sure if he should be relieved or terrified. "Do you remember who that man was? Was it someone you knew?" Jane shook her head. "I don't know. But it felt familiar. Like I should know him, but I don't." Rafael's mind raced. It was the first glimpse of her past, but it was incomplete. It wasn't enough to explain why she had been in the accident or why her memory had been lost in the first place, but it was a beginning. "I don't know what's happening," Jane whispered, her voice breaking as the weight of the situation overwhelmed her. "I don't know who I am." Rafael reached for her hand, holding it gently, his touch warm and reassuring. "You're Jane, and you're not alone in this. I'm here, no matter what you remember or don't remember. We'll figure this out together." For the first time since the accident, Jane allowed herself to cry. It wasn't just the tears of someone who had lost their memory. It was the tears of someone who had been running from their past, unable to face what it might reveal. She had finally let go, allowing the emotion to wash over her. And Rafael, though unsure of what the future would hold, stood beside her, unwavering. The road ahead was uncertain. The pieces of Jane's past were scattered, and they were both afraid of what might be uncovered. But for the first time in a long time, Jane felt like she wasn't facing it alone. As the days passed, Jane's memories continued to trickle back bit by bit, like fragmented puzzle pieces slowly falling into place. But the more she remembered, the more questions arose, questions that Rafael wasn't sure he was ready to answer. The memory of the man in the park, the one she had been holding hands with before the accident, was still lingering in her thoughts. It gnawed at her, a silent whisper in her mind, urging her to remember more, but each time she tried, the memory slipped away like sand through her fingers. One afternoon, Jane sat by the window in Rafael's apartment, her gaze lost in the distance. Rafael had been watching her for a while, noticing how she seemed distant, her brow furrowed as she struggled to piece together her past. "Jane," he called softly, walking over to her. "You've been quiet today. What's on your mind?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I keep thinking about him, the man I remember from the park. It feels like I should know him, but I don't. It's like he's a part of me, but I can't reach him." Rafael swallowed hard, trying to keep his expression calm. He had been afraid of this moment, the moment when Jane would begin to uncover more of her past. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what might come next. "Maybe it's not important," Rafael said, sitting beside her. "You're here now, you're safe." But Jane shook her head. "No, Rafael. I need to know. I can't move forward until I understand what happened to me. Who was I before the accident? Why can't I remember anything?" Rafael took a deep breath, his heart heavy with the burden of the truth he had been avoiding, the truth he had been keeping from her. He hadn't wanted to bring it up, but he knew that it was time. "Jane," he said softly, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "there's something I need to tell you. The man in your memory, his name is Daniel. He was your fiancé." Jane's eyes widened in shock. "My fiancé," she whispered, disbelief in her voice. "I was engaged." Rafael nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Yes. You were supposed to get married. But something happened before the wedding. He was involved in the accident. You both were." And after it, you lost all memory of him and everything else. Jane sat in stunned silence, the revelation crashing over her like a wave. The man she had remembered, the man who felt so familiar, he was the one she had once planned to spend her life with. And yet, the memories of him had been lost, wiped away by the very accident that had taken so much from her. "But why didn't you tell me?" Jane asked, her voice shaking with emotion. "Why didn't you say anything before?" Rafael looked up at her, his eyes filled with regret. "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want to make things harder for you, not when you were already struggling so much. But I also didn't want to keep the truth from you forever." Jane closed her eyes, her mind racing as she tried to process the weight of everything Rafael had just told her. "I was supposed to marry him," she murmured, her voice soft, almost as if she was speaking to herself. "And I don't remember any of it." Rafael reached for her hand, his grip tight but comforting. "You don't have to remember everything, Jane. You're not defined by your past. You're here now, and I'm here for you. We'll get through this together." As Jane looked at him, a tear slid down her cheek. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't alone in this journey. The truth had come out, and though it was painful, it was a step forward. The pieces of her past were slowly being revealed, and with each piece, she was learning to rebuild herself. But there was still one thing left unanswered. Would she ever be able to truly move on from the man she had once loved, or would the ghost of Daniel continue to haunt her, no matter how much time passed? The days following Rafael's confession were filled with silence and reflection. Jane had retreated into herself, grappling with the revelation that her past was not just a void, but a puzzle with pieces that, once fit together, would reveal a life she couldn't remember. The man she had been engaged to, Daniel, was no longer just a forgotten memory. He was a shadow of her former life, standing in the way of her ability to fully embrace her future. Rafael watched as Jane wrestled with her emotions, her gaze often distant, as if she were searching for something lost in the vast expanse of her mind. He understood her need to find closure, but he also feared that the search for her past might tear her apart. He couldn't bear the thought of losing the woman who had become so integral to his life, even if she didn't remember the person she once was. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet of Rafael's apartment, Jane finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "I keep thinking about him," she confessed, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. "About Daniel. I want to remember what we had, what I lost. But at the same time, I'm afraid, what if it was all a lie? What if I'm not the person I think I am?" Rafael turned to her, his heart aching as he saw the uncertainty in her eyes. He reached out and gently took her hand in his, squeezing it softly. "Jane," he said quietly, his voice tender, "what you had with Daniel, that was your past. It doesn't define who you are now. You're not the same person you were before the accident, and that's okay. You don't have to carry the weight of who you were. You're allowed to rebuild yourself." Jane looked at him, her gaze searching his face as though she were looking for something, perhaps a reassurance, a sign that it was okay to let go of the life she couldn't remember. "But what about you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What if I can't move on from the person I was before? What if I'm not the person you want me to be?" Rafael smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I don't need you to be anyone else, Jane. I need you to be you, the woman you are right now, the woman who's been strong enough to face everything, even when it's hard. I care about you, not because of who you were, but because of who you are." Her eyes softened, and for the first time in days, Jane allowed herself to relax into his embrace. The weight of her past hadn't disappeared, but for the first time, she felt like it didn't have to control her. She didn't have to remember everything, and perhaps she didn't need to. "I don't know what the future holds," she said quietly, "but I know I want to find out with you." Rafael's heart swelled as he held her tighter, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. The past may have shaped them, but it was no longer the thing that held them together. It was the present, the connection they shared now, and the promise of a future neither of them could predict. As Jane closed her eyes, resting her head against his chest, she knew that the road ahead would be difficult, Her past was still a mystery, and the memory of Daniel would always linger in the background. But with Rafael by her side, she felt like she could face whatever came next. Together, they would write a new story, a story of healing, of love, and of a future that had yet to be written.